Welcome to The Explainer. Sometimes the daily news just feels like a bunch of random headlines flying at you. But today, we're going to connect the dots. We're going to take a look at the events of just a single day, from DC to the Middle East all the way to Wall Street, and see how it all weaves together into one big story. Okay, let's get into it.
So, here's the game plan. We're going to start with some big decisions coming out of the White House. Then, we'll see the real-world human impact of crises on two very different coastlines. After that, we'll look at some high-stakes deals being made at the negotiating table, and we'll wrap it all up by checking the economy's pulse on Wall Street. First up, Washington, D.C. A whole series of administrative actions got set in motion today, and interestingly, they can all be summed up by a few key numbers.
The day really kicked off with this number, 37. That's how many security clearances for former and current government officials were revoked by the Director of National Intelligence. Now, what makes this so significant is that some of these officials were people directly involved in the 2016 Russia investigation.
Next up, 6,000. That's how many student visas the State Department reportedly just canceled. Now, about 4,000 of those were for pretty straightforward criminal acts, things like assault or burglary. But the rest, they were revoked for, and I'm quoting here, support for terrorism, with really no other details provided.
And the final number from the administration today is 280. This is the number of beds in a brand new immigration detention center that was just announced for Nebraska. It's all part of a much bigger plan to get the facilities ready for an increase in deportations.
But policy isn't just about security and immigration. Something pretty fascinating happened in the world of public health, revealing a really rare split between what the nation's pediatricians are saying and what the U.S. government is saying.
And this is a huge deal. I mean, it's the first time in 30 years that the country's pediatricians are pointing one way and the government is pointing another. The American Academy of Pediatrics is strongly recommending shots for kids as young as 6 months. But the government? They're taking a more hands-off approach, not recommending them, but saying they're allowed if you talk to your doctor. This kind of public disagreement, it's super rare, and it can create a lot of confusion for parents.
Okay, so we've heard the policies. Now let's talk about the real-world consequences, where these events have an immediate life-or-death human impact. We're looking at two totally different crises, unfolding on opposite sides of the globe.
Off the east coast of the U.S., Hurricane Erin, this massive Category 2 storm, is making its presence known. And get this, even though it's likely to stay offshore, it's so powerful that it's kicking up life-threatening surf and dangerous rip currents all the way from Florida up the coast into Canada.
And this quote from an official in North Carolina's Outer Banks, wow, it just hits home how real the danger is. They're telling residents flat out, if you don't evacuate, for several days we simply won't be able to reach you. It's a really stark warning about what it means to face a storm like this.
And this isn't some theoretical threat. 60. That's the number of people who had already been rescued from those powerful rip currents near Wilmington, North Carolina. And that's before the worst of the storm had even arrived.
Now let's shift our focus to a different coastline, where a man-made crisis continues to take just a devastating toll. Hospitals in Gaza reported another 28 deaths today. And the tragedy is, these people died not only from Israeli strikes, but also in desperate searches for humanitarian aid. And to give you some perspective on the danger for the people trying to help, a new UN report just dropped a grim new record. 383. That is how many aid workers were killed around the world last year. It's the highest number ever recorded.
And this right here really shows you the scale of this particular crisis. Of that record-breaking number of global aid worker deaths, the UN reports that nearly half of them, a full 49%, were killed in Gaza alone. It's just an absolutely staggering concentration of risk for people trying to do good.
But, in the face of these crises, there are always people trying to find a way forward. So now we're going to turn to the negotiating table, where a couple of very different deals were being hammered out to try and find some kind of resolution. First, let's go back to the Middle East, because there was a potential breakthrough. Hamas has apparently given a tentative yes to a truce proposal from Arab mediators. According to Egyptian officials, the ball is now in Israel's court to respond.
So what's actually in this deal? Well, it's a four-step framework. It starts with a 60-day truce, 2 months of quiet. That's meant to create the space for step 2, a huge exchange of hostages and prisoners. That would be followed by a massive surge in humanitarian aid. And only then, if everything holds, would talks begin for a permanent end to the war.
Meanwhile, in a totally different kind of negotiation, Air Canada finally reached a deal to end a really disruptive strike by 10,000 of its flight attendants. This thing kicked off right in the middle of the peak summer travel season, causing chaos.
And the impact was just massive.
We're talking about 130,000 travelers affected for every single day the strike was on. Now, flights are expected to resume, but the airline is saying, hey, it could take a week or even more to get everything back to normal.
All right, so with all of this going on, policy shifts, natural disasters, international crises, labor disputes, how did the economy react to it all? For our final stop, we're heading to Wall Street to take the financial temperature.
Yeah, the mood on Wall Street was definitely nervous. You could feel it. The market really struggled all day, and it was mostly driven by a pretty big sell-off in major tech stocks, which led to a very mixed, kind of uncertain close.
And these final numbers really tell the story of a divided market. I mean, you look at the Dow, it ended the day almost completely flat, but that is not the whole story. The real action was in tech, with the Nasdaq just plummeting over 300 points, and that dragged the broader S&P 500 down for its third day in a row. That's a pretty clear signal of anxiety from investors. And that brings us full circle. We saw policy decisions made in Washington. We saw life-or-death crises on coastlines near and far and the negotiations trying to solve them. All of it created this atmosphere of uncertainty that, in the end, was reflected in a nervous day on Wall Street. It's a powerful reminder that nothing happens in a vacuum, which leaves us with one last question to think about. How do all these little ripples from a single day come together to shape the powerful currents of our world?